Here we are in the middle of May, and we are still celebrating the season of Easter. And next week, we will still be celebrating the season of Easter. The church celebrates the liturgical season of Easter for 50 days. And hopefully, being reminded of that brings you some feelings of comfort, happiness, and hope. Not confusion and wondering if I'm stuck in some kind of coronavirus time warp. The Easter season celebrates the resurrection of Christ. And as followers of Christ, we are a resurrection people. And that, in effect, makes us people of hope. Back in March, when our world began to shift and events began to be postponed and canceled, I felt relatively comfortable seeing things disappear off my calendar because I would just scroll down further in my calendar to find an event to look forward to. So when Holy Week services were canceled and I realized I wouldn't be able to attend and participate in them at church, I got my calendar out and scrolled down to a family vacation that had been scheduled. I could look forward to that. Well, until it was canceled. That was fine. Back to the calendar and the scrolling, and I found a concert I had tickets for. I could eagerly anticipate that event until it was also canceled. I imagine many of you did the same, going to our calendars looking for something to look forward to and have hope in, whether that was a birthday celebration, a vacation, or a graduation. At this point, we've probably learned that a calendar is not an instrument of hope. The cross, however, is. The early Christians believed that Jesus would return in their lifetime. They thought that their generation would experience the return of Christ. Can you imagine that? Think about what it feels like to be excited and anticipate going on vacation. And then imagine what the first Christians must have felt like anticipating and waiting with eager expectation for the imminent return of Jesus. They did this day in and day out, decade after decade, going to sleep, waking up, thinking, well, today could be the day. Jesus might be right around the next corner or on my next trip to the well. Inevitably, they were faced with the reality that Jesus had not returned, and their memories of him were growing fuzzy and unclear. People who had heard his parables firsthand and witnessed his miracles were beginning to die. So they started to write down the stories and the sayings of Jesus, and we were given the gift of the Gospels. Despite the fact what the early Christians had hoped for or expected to happen wasn't happening to them, that didn't cause them to stop making forward progress. In fact, I think evidence points otherwise. They remained deeply and firmly rooted in their hope and faith in the resurrected Christ. They were diehard fans. They hadn't just jumped on the Jesus bandwagon. The first centuries of the Christian church were hard and filled with struggle. There were several persecutions, and many martyrs were formed during this time. So much so that Tertullian writes that the blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church. This doesn't sound like fertile ground for hope. But the hope that Christ gives us through his resurrection provides us with support and strength through any situation, whether that's an emerging and persecuted church filled with martyrs or a global pandemic. The resurrected hope is something that I can't let go of. It's how I view the world and others. When asked about my faith, I often reply, well, I'm a sucker for unconditional love. How can I not have hope in a God who became human solely to spend time with us, to prepare us to love one another as brothers and sisters, and a God who loves us so unconditionally, wildly, and without reserve that he was willing to be crucified? How can I not have hope in something like that? That doesn't mean that my faith doesn't waver and I don't have struggles or encounter challenges to remaining steadfast and attentive in my relationship with God. But by embracing this resurrected hope, I find solace, joy, and some eager expectation for what is to come. With resurrected hope, we're not blind to our circumstance. This is not a don't worry, be happy, close your eyes, cross your fingers, and hope everything's going to be okay kind of mantra. But rather, the resurrected hope allows us to hold in tandem the reality of our situation and the life-giving salvific act of the resurrection. Through whatever circumstance we encounter or are living in, whether that's darkness, confusion, or despair, the light, clarity, and comfort of God's love is present to us in the resurrected Christ. This hope allows us to not only survive, but it invites us to rise and thrive with Christ. No wonder Easter is 50 days long. That's a lot to celebrate. Some questions to think about this week. How do you respond to not getting what you hoped for? How can you tap into the hope of the resurrection? And what lesson can you learn from the hope that the first Christians possessed? Stay safe and be well.